History of Life on Earth. The Unbroken Chain from the First Life to You. Chapter 10, Mammals. Assembled in the Dark. 135 million years of hiding. Imagine an animal the size of a shrew. It weighs less than a slice of bread. It lives under a fern, and a burrow it dug itself, in a world where the ground shakes. It comes out at night, because in the daytime, the world belongs to things that are 20,000 times its size, and would not even notice eating it. It hunts insects in total darkness by sound and by smell, and by the touch of the long, stiff hairs on its face. It is warm, and probably expensively warm in the cold of the night, and to stay that way it must eat and eat and eat. It has been doing this for a very long time. Its ancestors were doing it when the first sauropods appeared. Its descendants will still be doing it when Tyrannosaurus walks 100 million years later. It is not winning. It is not on its way to winning. There is no arc here bending toward triumph. It is small, it is frightened, it is nocturnal, and it stays that way, generation after generation, for a span of time so long that it defeats the imagination. While the great warm-blooded feathered giants of the Archosaur line run the entire planet above its head. That animal is your ancestor. And nearly everything that makes you a mammal was built inside it, in the dark, under pressure, by fear. That's the argument of this chapter, and it's worth stating bluntly at the outset, because it inverts the story most people carry around. The dinosaurs did not hold mammals back until an asteroid finally let us out. The dinosaurs made us. 135 million years of marginality is not an interruption in the mammal story. It is the forge. Look at the list of things that define a mammal: hair, warm blood, exquisite hearing, an enormous brain, whiskers, milk, live birth, and extended childhood. Now ask, what kind of animal needs those things? Not a dominant one. A dominant animal doesn't need to hear a beetle walking across a leaf. It doesn't need to be warm at 3 in the morning. It doesn't need to hide its young inside its own body, or feed them from its own flesh, or spend years teaching them. Every one of those traits is the equipment of something small, hunted, and cold. The asteroid didn't create mammals. It just opened the door on something that had already, quietly, in the dark, become extraordinary. 10.2 Not Yet Mammals. Chapter 9 left the cynodonts, the last arapsids, the survivors of the great dying, small and warm and getting smaller. And here's what's remarkable about them. By the late Triassic, well before there were any mammals at all, the cynodonts had already assembled most of a mammal. They had different kinds of teeth in different parts of the jaw, cutting teeth in front, complicated multi-cusped grinding teeth in back. They had a secondary palate, the bony shelf that lets an animal breathe while chewing. They walked with their legs under their bodies. Their lower jaws were increasingly dominated by a single large bone at the front, with the other jaw bones shrinking away behind it. Watch that. It's the best story in this chapter. Their snouts have small holes in the bone, foramina, through which nerves and blood vessels ran out to the face. That's where whiskers get their supply, which means whiskers. And a whisker is a modified hair, which means hair, fur, on an animal that was not yet a mammal. And inside their nasal cavities are the attachment ridges for respiratory turbinates, thin, delicate, scrolled bones covered in moist tissue, arranged so that outgoing breath is stripped of its heat in its water before it leaves the body. You only need those if you're breathing hard and often. You only need them if you're warm-blooded. So look at what we've got. Fur, warm blood, differentiated teeth, chewing, a palate, legs underneath, whiskers. None of these animals were mammals. There was never a moment when a reptile gave birth to a mammal. There was no threshold, no leap, no first mammal opening its eyes on a Triassic morning. There was a long, slow, unhurried procession of small, furry, warm animals. Each one a functioning creature in its own right, each slightly more like us than its parents, across tens of millions of years. You have seen this pattern in every chapter of this book. The eukaryotic toolkit sitting in an archaean before there were eukaryotes. Cat herons in a single cell before there were bodies. Box genes in a jellyfish. Lungs in a fish. Fingers in a swimmer. The toolkit always precedes the function. By convention, we call something a mammal once it has a particular jaw joint, and by that standard, the first true mammals show up in the late Triassic and early Jurassic. roughly 225 to 200 million years ago. They were the size of a shrew. They ate insects. They came out at night. And that is what they remained, essentially, for the next 135 million years. 10.3 The expensive fire. Endothermy, being warm from the inside, is the keystone. Pull it out the whole mammalian arch collapses. Nearly every other trait in this chapter exists to pay for it, feed it, or make use of it. Here's what it buys. It uncouples you from the sun. A lizard is a machine that runs on ambient temperature. Cold lizard, slow lizard. It must bask before it can hunt. When the temperature drops, it stops. Its life is governed by the weather. A mammal simply doesn't care. It can hunt at dawn, at midnight, in a snowstorm, at the bottom of a burrow. Its muscles work at the same speed regardless of what the world outside is doing. It has taken its climate with it. And that is what opened the night. This is the decisive point of the whole chapter. In the Mesozoic, the daylight world was taken, comprehensively, by animals that could and would eat you. But the night was empty. Cold, dark, and available to anything that could stay warm and stay fast without the sun. Endothermy is what made the night habitable. The night is the only place the mammals had, and endothermy is the rent. And the price is brutal. A mammal's resting metabolic rate is roughly 5 to 10 times that of a reptile the same size. 5 to 10 times. That is not a modest markup. It means a mammal must find, catch, and process 5 to 10 times the food forever, just to keep the lights on. And it means a mammal cannot fast. A crocodile can go a year without eating. A snake can digest one large meal for a month and want nothing more. A shrew starves to death in a few hours. You are burning fuel right now, sitting still, reading, at a rate that would horrify a lizard. Your body is a fire that can never be allowed to go out, and every meal you have ever eaten was feeding it. Endothermy only pays if you can find the food. And it only pays if you can hold on to the heat, which is what hair is for. Hair is keratin, the very same protein family that Chapter 9 used to waterproof amniotic skin and harden claws, now grown outward as filaments. Evolution reached for the material it already had. What it was originally for is debated. It may have started as touch, as whiskers, sensing the world in the dark, which the cynodont evidence rather supports, and which would be a lovely irony. Hair as a sense organ first, and only later as a coat. But what it became is insulation. And the trick of it isn't the hair, it's the air. A pelt traps a layer of still air against the skin, and still air is a superb insulator. The fur isn't keeping you warm, the fur is holding air, and the air is keeping you warm. Around that core, mammals built a whole thermal control system that no reptile has. Sweat glands, evaporative cooling, water drawn out onto the skin to carry heat away as it evaporates. Keep this one in mind. It will turn out to matter enormously in one particular primate, and in a way you will not expect. Sebaceous glands, oils to condition hair and skin. Brown fat, a genuinely strange tissue, packed with mitochondria, whose entire purpose is to waste energy. It deliberately short-circuits the ADP-making machinery of Chapter 2, letting the proton gradient collapse without doing any useful work, so that all of its energy comes out as pure heat. It's a furnace made of fat. Human newborns are full of it, because a baby can't shiver. Subcutaneous fat, a second insulating layer under the skin. Shivering, muscles contracting uselessly, on purpose, to generate heat. And piloerection, the reflex that pulls each hair upright, thickening the trapped layer of air. Every furry mammal does it when it's cold, and it works. You still do it. You have almost no fur left, so when your muscles yank at the base of each hair, nothing rises and nothing is trapped and no heat is retained. All that happens is that the skin puckers around each empty follicle. Goosebumps are a mammal trying to fluff up a coat that isn't there anymore. It is a completely useless reflex, and you perform it every time you step out into the cold or hear a piece of music that moves you. A small, involuntary, 400-million-year-old muscle twitch. Still firing. Still faithfully doing a job that has had no purpose in your lineage for a very long time. And the birds did it all again, separately. Endothermy, in a lineage that split from ours over 300 million years ago. They insulated with feathers instead of hair. They evolved a fully four-chambered heart on their own. They arrived at the same metabolic strategy from the other side of the amniotic tree without ever consulting us. The same solution twice, which tells you it isn't a fluke. It tells you that if you push a land vertebrate hard enough towards sustained activity, warm blood is where it ends up. 10.4 a mouth that works. Now, if you must eat 5 to 10 times as much as a reptile, you had better be very good at eating. And so mammals rebuilt the mouth from the ground up, and every part of the redesign traces straight back to the fire. Different teeth for different jobs. A crocodile's mouth is a row of interchangeable spikes. They're all essentially the same tool, and they do one thing. Hold on. A crocodile cannot chew. It grips the tears off a chunk by spinning, and it swallows the chunk whole. Open your mouth and count the tools. Incisors at the front, flat, sharp for cutting and nipping. Canines, pointed for piercing and gripping. Premolars and molars at the back, broad, cusped, complicated for crushing and grinding. 4 different instruments in one jaw working in sequence on the same mouthful. That's heterodont dentition, and it means a mammal can perform mastication, actually breaking food down mechanically before it's swallowed, grinding it into a paste, exploding the surface area available to your digestive enzymes. For a lizard, this would be a luxury. For an endotherm, it is a necessity. You cannot fuel a fire that hot by swallowing your food in lumps and waiting. Teeth that meet exactly. Mammalian teeth occlude, the upper cusps fit into the lower valleys with real precision, like machined parts. That's what makes grinding possible. And it comes at a cost that you personally are paying. Reptiles are polyphyodont. They replace their teeth continuously, throughout life, forever. A shark grows a new set every couple of weeks. Lose a tooth, another arrives. Mammals get 2 sets. That's it. A baby set and an adult set and then nothing for the rest of your life. This is diphyodonty, and the reason for it is purely mechanical. Teeth that must fit together with precision cannot be constantly replaced, because every new tooth would arrive at a slightly different height and angle, and would have to renegotiate its fit with a moving target. Precision and replacement are incompatible. You must give up one. Mammals chose precision, which is why dentistry exists. Every filling, every crown, every root canal, every ache is a bill for a decision made in the Triassic, when our ancestors traded the endless conveyor of reptile teeth for a mouth that could actually chew. And you can breathe while you do it. Run your tongue along the roof of your mouth. That hard shelf is your secondary palate, and above it, sealed off, entirely separate, runs the passage from your nose to your throat, which means air and food travel in separate tubes and only meet at the very back. A reptile has no such shelf. Its nostrils open straight into the roof of its mouth, which means that when it fills its mouth with prey, it has effectively blocked its own airway. It is holding its breath while it eats. For a crocodile, that's tolerable. It eats rarely, and its oxygen demand is low, and it can simply wait. For an endotherm that has to chew a great deal of food, several times a day, while consuming oxygen at 10 times the reptile rate, it is impossible. You cannot suspend breathing every time you eat when your metabolism is a furnace. So mammals grew a floor between the two. You are breathing right now while your tongue rests in your mouth. You take that for granted. A crocodile cannot. And note, once again, when the secondary palate appears. In the Permian therapsids, already forming. Long before mammals. The toolkit assembled in advance by animals that had no idea what it was for. 10.5 The bones that left the jaw. Now for the best story in this book. I mean that. Of all the evidence for evolution, the fossils, the genes, the geography, the vestiges, the embryos, this is the one that stops people cold because there is genuinely no other way to explain it. Start with the reptile's jaw. The lower jaw of a lizard or a crocodile is not one bone. It's several fitted together. And the joint, the actual hinge on which the jaw swings, is formed between a bone at the back of the lower jaw called the articular, and a bone in the skull called the quadrate. Particular against quadrate. That's the jaw joint of every reptile, every bird, and every amniote outside our lineage. And meanwhile, in the ear, there is exactly one bone that conducts sound, the stapes, which, as Chapter 7 noted, is itself a modified piece of a gill arch. Nothing in this book is ever new. Now look at yourself. Your lower jaw is one bone. A single, solid, U-shaped bone, the dentary, and it hinges directly against a completely different bone of the skull, the squamosal, in a completely different place. Different bones. Different joint. Different location. And inside your ear, there are 3 bones, the smallest bones in your body, the smallest bones in any mammal, strung in a delicate chain across the middle ear. Malleus, the hammer. Incus, the anvil. Stapes, the stirrup. Where did the extra 2 come from? The articular and the quadrate, the 2 bones that form the reptilian jaw joint, did not disappear. They shrank and they migrated backward and they moved into the ear. The articular became the malleus. The quadrate became the incus. The hinge of your ancestor's jaw is now hanging inside your skull, in a cavity full of air, conducting the sound of your own voice. I want to be very clear that this is not a poetic reconstruction or a plausible guess. It is one of the most thoroughly documented facts in vertebrate biology, and it is established 3 separate ways. 1. The fossils show it happening. The cynodont record contains a beautiful graded sequence. The dentary grows and grows, taking over more and more of the lower jaw. The bones behind it, including the articular, shrink and drift backward toward the ear. But there's an obvious objection, and it's a good one. How can a jaw joint become an ear bone? At some point in the middle, wouldn't the animal have to have no working jaw? A creature with a half-migrated jaw joint would be unable to bite. It would starve. The transition seems impossible, except that the fossils answer it directly, and the answer is astonishing. There exist transitional animals, advanced cynodonts, and early mammal relatives, with 2 jaw joints at once. The old articular quadrate joint, still there, still functioning. And right beside it, the new dentary squamosal joint, already formed, already working. Both, side by side, in the same jaw, in the same animal. For a long stretch of evolutionary time, these creatures had a redundant double-hinged jaw, which meant that the old joint could be relieved of its structural duty, gradually over millions of years, without the jaw ever failing for a single generation. The new joint took the load. The old one was free to become something else. That is exactly what a gradual process predicts must have existed. And there it is, in the rock. 2. You build it yourself every time. In a developing mammalian embryo, including a human one, the malleus and incus form from the first pharyngeal arch from Meckel's cartilage. That is the same embryonic tissue. In the same arch, that Chapter 7 identified as the source of the vertebrate jaw. Your ear bones grow in the place where a jaw joint would be, out of the tissue a jaw joint is made of, and then they detach and migrate into your ear, in every mammal in every generation, including in you, before you were born. The transformation is not just recorded in stone. It is reenacted in the womb. 3. Comparative anatomy across every living amniote confirms the homologies down to the details. So why did it happen? 2 pressures working together, and both of them come straight out of this chapter. The jaw got stronger. Mastication demanded a big, powerful chewing muscle, and a big muscle needed a big bone to attach to. So the dentary expanded, and as it expanded, it crowded the little post-dentary bones out of the back of the jaw and took over the job of the joint entirely. Those bones were freed from any mechanical duty. They were, suddenly, available, and the animal desperately needed to hear. Think about what our shrew-sized ancestor actually was. Small, nocturnal, hunting insects it could not see, being hunted by things it could not see. In the dark, hearing is not a convenience. Hearing is survival. And here is why 3 bones beat 1. A chain of 3 small bones acts as a lever system. It takes the large, weak vibrations of a big eardrum and converts them into small, forceful vibrations at the tiny window into the inner ear, matching the impedance between air, thin, and the fluid inside your cochlea, thick. So the sound isn't simply reflected away. The result is a vast improvement in sensitivity, and crucially, a dramatic extension into high frequencies. High frequency is the sound of small things. The scrape of an insect's leg. The rustle of something moving in leaf litter. The frequencies that tell a shrew-sized animal in total darkness that dinner is 2 centimeters to the left, or that something large is coming. Reptiles with one ear bone largely hear low, dull, muffled sound. Mammals hear the texture of the dark. The mammalian ear is a nocturnal adaptation. It is a piece of night vision equipment made of bone, assembled from a discarded jaw. Sit still for a moment and listen to whatever is around you. A voice, traffic, a bird, the hum of a room. Every one of those sounds is arriving at your brain because a bone that once let a Triassic animal bite is now, in your skull, being tapped by a membrane and passing the tremor along. Evolution is not an engineer. It cannot go back to the drawing board, and it cannot order new parts. It can only take what is already lying on the bench and put it to some other use. It took a jaw hinge and made an ear out of it. 10.6 the bellows and the divided pump. Feeding the fire needs more than food. It needs oxygen, and it needs it delivered relentlessly. The diaphragm. Chapter 9 gave amniotes rib-driven breathing. Expand the chest, drop the pressure, let the atmosphere push air in. Mammals kept it, and then added something no other vertebrate on Earth has. A diaphragm, a great dome of muscle slung across the body, dividing the chest from the belly. It has one job, and it does it about 20,000 times a day for your entire life. When it contracts, the dome flattens, driving downward, hauling the floor of your chest cavity away from your lungs, and pulling air in with a force that ribs alone could never manage. Put your hand on your belly and breathe in deeply. Feel it push out against your palm. That's not your lungs. Your lungs are up in your chest. What you're feeling is your abdominal organs being shoved downward and forward by a sheet of muscle that has just contracted above them. No reptile has this. No bird has this. No amphibian has this. It is ours alone, a mammalian invention, a dedicated breathing muscle, and it is the reason a mammal can suck down enough air to run a body 10 times hotter than a lizard's. And it feeds lungs that are no longer simple sacs, but a foam of millions of microscopic bubbles, the alveoli, packing an enormous gassing exchange surface into a chest cavity. The alveolar surface of your two lungs, spread flat, would cover something like half a tennis court, the four-chambered heart. And at last, after 4 chapters, the heart is finished. Chapter 8 gave us 3 chambers with mixing. Chapter 9 gave us a partial wall. Mammals completed 2 atria, 2 ventricles, a solid wall down the middle, and no mixing at all, ever. 2 pumps and 1 organ beating in perfect time and utterly separate. Now, why does it matter so much? Not just purity of blood. There's a subtler reason, and it's elegant. Once you have 2 completely separate pumps, you can run them at different pressures. The systemic side, feeding the body, has to be driven hard, high pressure, to force blood up to a brain, out to a leg, through kilometers of capillary bed against gravity. But the pulmonary side, feeding the lungs, must be gentle. The alveolar capillaries are inconceivably delicate, a membrane thin enough for oxygen to cross almost instantly, which means thin enough to rupture. Hit them with the pressure your aorta carries and your lungs would fill with blood. A single ventricle cannot do both. Whatever pressure it generates for everything. 2 ventricles can. Your left ventricle is thick-walled and powerful. Your right is thin-walled and mild. They pump the same volume every beat at completely different pressures. One to squeeze blood through a whole body, one to breathe it gently across a membrane. And the birds did this too, independently. Same complete separation, same reason, from a separate 3-chambered ancestor, in a lineage that had been apart from ours for 300 million years. Both lineages became endothermic. Both lineages fully divided the heart. That correlation is not an accident. It is what a very high, very sustained metabolic rate demands, and evolution found it twice because there was nowhere else to go. 10.7 milk and the return of the egg. Now the trait we are named for. Not hair. Not warm blood. Not the ear. Mammal comes from mama, the breast. We are, by our own naming, the animals that feed our young from our bodies. And the living mammals give us something rare and precious. 3 different reproductive strategies, all still walking around, forming a sequence you can lay end to end. The egg layers. The monotremes, the platypus, and the echidnas, in Australia and New Guinea lay eggs. Leathery shelled amniotic eggs, exactly as Chapter 9 described, into a burrow. And they are unquestionably mammals. They have fur. They are warm-blooded. They have the dentary squamosal jaw joint. They have 3 bones in their ears. And they make milk. They have no nipples. The milk simply oozes out through patches of skin on the mother's belly, and the young lap it out of her fur. Read that again because of what it proves. Here is an animal that lays an egg, the full ancestral amniotic package, and then, when it hatches, nurses it. Lactation is older than live birth. A mammal can be a complete mammal in every respect and still lay an egg. The milk came first. The pouch bearers. The marsupials, kangaroos, koalas, wombats, possums do give birth, but almost absurdly early. A newborn red kangaroo is about the size of a jelly bean. It is pink, blind, deaf, and hairless. Its hind legs are barely formed. It is, by any honest description, an embryo that has been evicted. And then it does something that ought to be impossible. Using its forelimbs, the only part of it that's properly developed, because it has to be, it crawls. Unaided. Up through its mother's fur, across her belly, a distance of several centimeters, which for an animal that size is a mountaineering expedition. It has no eyes to guide it. It finds its way by smell and by the pull of gravity and by nothing else we fully understand. And it reaches the pouch, and it climbs in, and it clamps onto a nipple, which then swells inside its mouth so it cannot let go. And there it stays, for months, finishing the development it was born far too early to have completed. The marsupial strategy is to keep gestation short and move nearly all the maternal investment into lactation. The pouch is an external womb. The milk is the placenta. The placentals, us. The placentals, or eutherians, are about 95% of living mammal species. Rodents, bats, cats, whales, elephants, primates, you. We gestate for a long time, and we do it by growing an organ. That is one of the strangest things in this entire book. And here is the payoff for Chapter 9. The placenta is not new. It is made from the chorion and the allantois, the exact same extraembryonic membranes that, in a shelled egg, pressed up against the inside of the shell and handled gas exchange and waste. In a placental mammal, those same membranes reach out and press up against the wall of the mother's uterus instead, and exchange oxygen, food, and waste directly with her bloodstream. The membrane that once breathed through an eggshell now breathes through a mother. And the amnion, the private pond, the sealed sack of water from the Carboniferous, was not discarded at all. You floated in it. A human fetus develops suspended in amniotic fluid, inside an amniotic sac, submerged in water, exactly as an embryo in an egg on a Permian riverbank did. When a pregnant woman's water breaks, that is the pond, 310 million years old, finally draining. Live birth did not throw away the amniotic egg. It swallowed it. The egg is still there. The shell is gone, and the mother is the shell. And where did milk come from? Almost certainly from a sweat gland. The mammary gland's development and its molecular machinery point back to the skin glands of Chapter 9, the same family of structures that gave us sweat and sebum. Modified, enriched, turned from a cooling system into a food supply. There's a lovely hypothesis about how it started. That the earliest secretions weren't food at all, but moisture, a damp antimicrobial fluid, secreted onto porous, parchment-shelled eggs to keep them from drying out and to keep them from rotting. Nutrition came later as the secretion grew richer and the hatchlings started drinking it. Milk may have begun as a way of watering an egg. And what milk does is more radical than it sounds. Milk breaks the oldest rule of being born. Before milk, every hatchling had to be able to feed itself immediately, which meant it had to be born capable, with working jaws, working senses, and a functioning body, ready to go on day one. Milk removes that requirement completely. Milk means a young animal can be born helpless, and stay helpless, and be kept alive anyway, nourished by a fluid perfectly formulated for it, requiring no teeth, no hunting, no skills, and no competence of any kind. Which means development doesn't have to be finished at birth. Which means the brain doesn't have to be finished at birth. Which means there can be a childhood. Hold that thought, because it is about to become the most important sentence in the chapter. 10.8 The brain and the time to fill it. The vertebrate brain of Chapter 7 Forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain gets elaborated in mammals in one very specific direction. The forebrain grows a new surface, the neocortex. 6 layers of neurons spread as a sheet across the top of the brain and found in no other animal on Earth. Not in a bird, not in a crocodile, not in an octopus. Mammals alone. It is the tissue of high-order perception, of planning, of spatial reasoning, of imagination, and eventually of abstract thought. And in many lineages it grew so large, so fast, that it ran out of room. So it did what a sheet of paper does when you push it into a box too small for it. It folded. The ridges and grooves of a wrinkled brain, the gyri and sulci, are a crumpled sheet, packing an enormous area into a skull that could not keep up. Why did it grow? 3 reasons, and every one of them is a thread from earlier in this chapter. Endothermy paid for it. Nerve tissue is the most metabolically extravagant material in the body. Your brain is about 2% of your body weight and consumes roughly 20% of your resting energy. It runs constantly, at full power, whether you're using it or not. An animal with a low, fluctuating metabolic rate simply cannot afford an organ like that. It's like trying to run a data center off a solar panel that only works when the sun is out. Endothermy pays the electric bill. Without the fire, there is no brain. Nocturnality shaped it. A creature that hunts in the dark cannot lead with its eyes. It must lead with hearing, and so it built the 3-boned ear, with smell and with touch, and so it grew whiskers. And here's the thing about those senses. They're computationally expensive. Vision in daylight hands you a picture, but a smell is a chemical hint that must be interpreted. A sound in the dark is a faint pattern that must be located, identified, and predicted. Whiskers deliver a stream of vibrations that must be assembled into a shape. The nocturnal senses demand processing. They demand cortex. Our ancestors' brains grew, in part, because they were doing the hard work of building a model of a world they could not see. And it left a scar. So long did mammals spend in the dark that they largely lost their color vision. Most mammals are dichromates, 2 kinds of color receptor, where a bird or a lizard or a fish has 4. We threw away receptors we weren't using, because in the dark, they were dead weight. You are looking at a world that your reptile relatives see in richer color than you do. We are recovering slightly in the primates, and that's chapter 12, but we never got back what we lost. The night is written into your eyes, and lactation gave it time. This is the keystone, and it's the loop this whole book has been building toward. A big brain is not a thing. It's a capacity. It arrives mostly empty. And an empty brain is worse than useless. It's an enormous metabolic bill for a machine that isn't running anything yet. A big brain is only worth its cost if there is time to program it. And time is exactly what milk provides. A young animal that is fed, protected, warmed, and carried does not have to be competent. It can spend months or years being bad at everything, clumsy, weak, ignorant, helpless, while its brain wires itself up on the basis of what it experiences, rather than what it inherited. That is a childhood. And a childhood is where learning happens. So the loop closes. Endothermy funds the brain. Milk and parental care buy the time to train it. A trained brain forages better, avoids danger better, and raises young better, which sustains the endothermy and the milk that made it possible. Round and round, tightening for 135 million years, in an animal that nobody was watching. Every turn of that loop makes the next turn easier. And the loop does not stop when the dinosaurs die. It keeps running through the primates and through the apes, and it ends several chapters from now. In an animal whose young are born so helpless and stay dependent for so long that it has time to learn an entire language before it can be trusted to cross a road. 10.9 The day the world burned. For 135 million years, they stayed small. Not entirely uniform, the picture of shrews trembling under ferns is a caricature, and the fossil record has been kind enough to correct it. There were Mesozoic mammals that swam. There were gliders. There were diggers. There was Reptile, badger-sized, whose fossilized stomach contained the bones of a juvenile dinosaur, an ancient mammal, caught with its last meal still inside it. And a fine rebuke to anyone who thinks our ancestors only ever ran away. But the ceiling held. Across the entire Jurassic and Cretaceous, no mammal ever got much bigger than a badger, The great niches, the browsers, the runners, the giants, the apex predators were taken, comprehensively, by dinosaurs, for a span of time longer than the entire history of animal life before it. And then, 66 million years ago, on an ordinary day, a rock about 10 kilometers across came out of the sky. It hit shallow water at the edge of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula at a shallow angle, which happened to be the worst possible geometry, into some of the worst possible rock, sulfur-rich and vaporizable. The Chicxulub crater is over 150 kilometers across. The immediate effects were beyond anything in human experience. An impact that punched a hole in the atmosphere, a thermal pulse that broiled the sky, ejecta thrown out of the atmosphere and falling back as glowing rain that likely set the world on fire, and tsunamis that scoured coastlines around the globe. But the killer was slower. Dust, soot, and sulfate aerosols filled the stratosphere and blocked the sun for months, perhaps years. And when the sun goes out, photosynthesis stops. And when photosynthesis stops, the food web collapses from the bottom. The plants die. Then everything that ate plants dies. Then everything that ate the things that ate plants dies. The entire pyramid falls in on itself, in order, from the ground up. There was aggravation too. Enormous volcanic eruptions in India, the Deccan traps, were underway around the same time, and many researchers believe the world was already stressed when the asteroid arrived. Roughly 75% of all species on Earth were gone. And every single non-avian dinosaur, the entire lineage, everything from Triceratops to Deinosaurus, the animals that had ruled the land for 150 million years and had survived everything the planet had thrown at them, all of it, gone. Except the birds. Some of the birds got through, and their descendants are outside your window. And the mammals lived. Why? Look honestly at the list, and then look at what this chapter has been describing. They were small. A small animal needs a small amount of food. When the world's food supply collapses by 90%, being tiny is not a weakness. It is the difference between life and death. They burrowed. They had holes in the ground. A burrow is shelter from a thermal pulse, and shelter from an impact winter, and shelter from everything. They ate anything. Insects, seeds, worms, carrion, rot. In a world where nothing was growing, the animals that survived were the ones eating things that don't need sunlight this year. Detritus, seeds in the soil, the decomposers, the dead. A specialist herbivore starves in a month. A generalist that will happily eat a beetle out of a rotting log does not. They were already nocturnal. A world without sunlight is a world they had been living in, by choice, for 135 million years. They were warm and they were furry. In the freezing dark of an impact winter, they could stay active. They brought their own heat. Look at that list again. Small, hidden, nocturnal, generalist, warm. Those are exactly the traits that had made them ecologically marginal. Every single one of them is a compromise, a retreat, an accommodation to the fact that something bigger owned the world. And every single one of them turned out to be the thing that saved them. The dinosaurs were the winners. They were superbly, magnificently adapted to a world with sunlight and plants and warmth and abundance. They were specialists in success. And specialists in success die when success ends. The mammals had spent 135 million years being adapted to hardship, to darkness, cold, hunger, and hiding. And when the world became dark, cold, hungry, and terrifying, they were already home. There is a hard, cold lesson in that, and it is worth sitting with. Evolution has no memory and no plan and no sense of fairness. It does not reward the strong. It rewards whatever happens to be lying around on the day the sky falls. And then the door swung open. The world was empty. Every large body size, every diet, every ecological role that dinosaurs had monopolized for 150 million years, vacant all at once. What followed is one of the most explosive adaptive radiations in the history of life. Within about 10 million years, an eye blink, mammals had exploded into essentially all the modern orders. Rodents and rabbits. Carnivores. Hoofed animals. Bats, which achieved powered flight, the fourth time a vertebrate lineage has managed it after the insects, the pterosaurs, and the birds. Whales, which took the amniotic egg their ancestors had fought so hard for, abandoned it entirely and went back to the sea. Elephants. Horses. And in the trees, small, wide-eyed, grasping, and clever, the primates. Body sizes exploded upward. Within a few tens of millions of years, there were mammals the size of a house. The waiting was over. 10.10 The logic of a mammal. Look at everything in this chapter and notice that it isn't a list. It's a machine, and every part turns every other part. Endothermy demanded fuel, so mammals built teeth that could actually chew and precise occlusion, and paid for it by giving up tooth replacement forever. Chewing plus high oxygen demand meant an animal could not stop breathing to eat, so it grew a secondary palate. Chewing demanded a huge jaw muscle, which demanded a huge dentary, which crowded the old jawbones out of their job entirely. And a small nocturnal animal in a dangerous world desperately needed better ears. So the freed bones migrated into the ear and became the malleus and incus. Endothermy demanded oxygen, so mammals grew a diaphragm and alveolar lungs, and finally divided the heart completely in two. Endothermy demanded heat retention, so hair and fat, and brown fat, and shivering, and goosebumps that no longer do anything. Endothermy made an expensive brain affordable. Milk and parental care gave that brain a childhood in which to learn. Pull any one piece out and the rest of it stops working. That is why the fossil record shows it being assembled slowly, over 80 million years, trait by trait, because you cannot install the system in one step. It had to grow into itself. And all of it, every part, was forged in the dark at small size, in the shadow of something that would have eaten it. We are what a hunted animal becomes when you give it enough time. Now the sky has fallen, and the giants are gone, and the forests are growing back. And in the branches of those new forests, one small insect-eating, nocturnal mammal with grasping hands and enormous eyes is about to stop coming down to the ground.